lives or touch them until it bursts your bubble and it happens. Later that evening around 8 p.m., he had left a message for Jeff on his answering machine asking him to please come by David's place because he wanted to see him and hang out.
Oh, okay.
Around 9:45 p.m. that evening, Jeff was buzzed up to David's apartment. Neighbors reported hearing some yelling. They heard the words, "Get the fuck out." There was a loud banging sound, followed immediately by running water.
Okay.
Now, that's not been explained, the running water, but for me, I'm thinking that he was washing some of the blood off of him.
Yeah.
So what happened was Cunanan had beat Jeff Trail over the head and the upper abdomen 27 times with a claw hammer.
Oh, good.
Which is a very, very physical and personal type of homicide.
Yeah, no kidding.
It was at this time that Andrew then rolled up Jeff's body into a carpet and left it in the apartment where he waited for David to come home.
Oh, so David wasn't even there?
David wasn't there. He
How
had
did
let
he
himself in.
Oh, good.
After the fact, when authorities had searched that apartment, they found Andrew's gym bag and it was full of steroids. So some people think that they can partially relate this to maybe like roid rage. David comes home later that evening. He finds Andrew and Jeff's body all rolled up in a carpet in the apartment. And it's believed that Andrew had held David hostage in the apartment for 2 days with Jeff's body before getting David into his own car and then driving him out to a secluded area on the outskirts of Minneapolis near a lake. Andrew then marched David out of the car and he shot him 3 times. Once in the back and twice in the head with Jeff's gun.
Because there's so little information about the step-by-step, I would assume that Andrew is dead.
Maybe. Maybe not.
Oh, my God.
By the time David and Jeff's bodies had been found, David's body was easy to find because it was broad daylight, it was outside, it was by a lake. Jeff's body had been found because David, you remember he was left in David's apartment?
Yeah.
David had not shown up to work. And his friends knew that that wasn't like him, and he obviously wasn't answering any of their phone calls.
Right.
So they had called the authorities. The authorities
went and did a wellness check.
Well, the authorities had told his friends that they could go over there and they could break the door down, but because David had a dog, if the dog barked at them or threatened them, they would shoot the dog.
Oh.
But David's friends were like, yeah, please don't do that.
Please don't shoot the dog.
I know. I felt so much better after I heard that his friends were like, don't do that. We're going to actually just get in touch with his landlord and see if they can let us in. So they got a hold of the landlord, and then they went into the apartment where they obviously found Jeff's body. Right. And then it was like, oh, so we need to call the police again. Okay.
Was he on a ground floor apartment? Because it wouldn't take that long for the blood to start seeping through the ceiling.
I don't know.
I mean, even if you're in a really well-built thing.
I mean, he was rolled up into a rug, too. They did say that the blood had been splattered all over the walls.
Yeah.
There was no blood seepage through the floor or anything. None of that was ever reported. The only reason this was ever discovered was because of his friends.
His friends, yeah.
Yeah.
Which, if you and I don't talk every day, I'm like, what happened?
Yeah, I would do the same for you. By the time their bodies were found, Andrew was already in Chicago.
Oh, good.
He stole David Madsen's car. It was a red Jeep. In Chicago, he had met with 72-year-old Lee Miglin, who would be his third victim.
Okay.
Miglin was incredibly successful. He had a wife and children. To this day, nobody can really confirm whether David and Lee ever had any kind of relationship or intimate encounters in the past, but many people feel like that was a factor in what happened to him. Lee Miglin was badly beaten and stabbed repeatedly in the chest with multiple different objects.
Oh.
In fact, when he was found, all of his ribs were broken.
Holy cow. That's not even easy.
That's hard. He was completely bound. His head had been wrapped repeatedly with plastic and masking tape, in which 2 holes had been cut for the nostrils. It's really messed up. Andrew had told friends and acquaintances before that he sometimes enjoyed wearing a latex mask with 2 holes in the nostrils when engaged in sexual activity.
Okay, but so do a lot of people, but those people don't go out and murder people.
Forewarning, not passing judgment on anybody or anything with this next statement, because I'm all for people practicing whatever makes them happy and whatever they want to do with others consensually.
Yeah, not murder though. Please.
As long as murder isn't on the menu. Okay, so some criminal profilers and investigators believe that Andrew was acting out a sexual fantasy, but he took it above and beyond the level that was needed for sexual gratification because he was a sadist. Andrew tied up Lee the way that he did to render him helpless, which is what they believe actually would would have aroused him and given him that gratification that he desired.
Okay.
For Andrew, it would have been all about control and domination. This also is another one of those homicides that's very physical and personal. If he was acting out a sexual fantasy, he didn't have to do what he did.
No.
The police had already been looking for Andrew since he left Minneapolis.
Because duh.
David and Jeff's bodies obviously had both been discovered at this point, and it was really, really easy for them, after discovering those two bodies, to track it back to Andrew. Now we have this Chicago bigwig who's been murdered. They're thinking that it's also Andrew. Also, too, like I said, the whole thing with the latex mask, they were like, well, that seems to be an interesting coincidence. Andrew stole Lee's car.
Stop stealing the people's cars that you killed? Maybe that's a thing? I don't know.
I mean, yeah, possibly. Since the police were tracking him, and they knew that he had Lee's car, and they knew that Lee's car had a car phone in it, they checked that out. And you remember car phones?
I
know. So they checked it out, and it had pinged on a few towers in the Philadelphia area. He was on the run.
He was doing a really odd cycle.
I know. I think that he had specific people he wanted to visit. But B, I think that he was trying to go places where people wouldn't find him, because it was like, if you make this much distance in that amount of time, maybe they won't think that you're there. Police in the Philadelphia area were notified. Unfortunately, what happened at that point, Andrew Cunanan was so lucky. He got so lucky so many times. He was listening to the radio when he heard an announcement issue describing his appearance in the car that he was driving. And he knew that he had to not only ditch the car fast, but also get rid of that car phone. So he ripped it out of the car and tossed it, which meant that the authorities then lost their ability to track him.
I feel like lucky is the name of the game for his entire life.
Yeah, it really is. The next stop on Andrew's shitty murder fest holiday extravaganza was New Jersey. So
why?
Andrew drove down a one-lane secluded road to Finns Point National Cemetery, which is a historic Civil War cemetery. So the graves that are there, they're clearly not recent. Nobody's really visiting there to, like, bring flowers to Grandpa's grave or anything. Yeah. But the grounds did require a caretaker, and that happened to be 45-year-old William Reese, who was a, by all accounts, loving husband and an amazing father, and he's described by those who knew him as being the kind of guy who would give you anything that you needed if you asked for it, including the shirt off of his back. Everything that I read about this guy made me real sad, because everybody that talks about him says just how incredibly sweet and wonderful he was. Yeah. Reese was reading his Bible and listening.
Of course he was.
I know. Reading his Bible and listening to Christian music on the radio when Cunanan showed up. Andrew decided that he wanted Reese's red pickup truck for his next getaway car, so he confronted Reese in the parking lot, pulled out the gun, forced him into the basement of the office on the property, and murdered him with a single bullet to the head.
Why though? Just take his car.
Exactly.
Leave him his Bible for some reading. Someone will come check on him.
Well, okay, speculation. Leave behind no witnesses. Now he has his new getaway car. He's made the FBI's top 10 most wanted list. Where does this sassy little sack of shit go next? South Beach, Florida.
Okay. I just want him to have a more efficient route.
For anyone that doesn't know anything about South Beach, there is a huge LGBTQ community there. And this is in the 90s, so it was really, really easy for Andrew to blend in there because he was an attractive gay male. His fifth and last victim will be the coup de grace of this story, so brace yourself, girl. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Are you ready? On July 15th, 1997, Italian fashion designer and celebrity Gianni Versace was walking up the front steps of his lavish mansion, which was named Casa Casarina, about to open his front door and greet a friend inside who was waiting to play tennis with him that afternoon. It's at this exact moment, as he's about to open his door, that Andrew Cunanan approaches Gianni from behind and shoots him twice in the back of the head at point blank range in broad daylight on a busy street.
Okay, so I thought I knew his name, and now I know why. I didn't mean to snuffle. I watched this happen. I mean, I didn't watch this happen because I wasn't there, but I watched this happen on the television.
Right?
Yeah.
I didn't know anything about him. I didn't know his name. I didn't really know anything about the murder of Gianni Versace.
Oh, I knew about the murder. Apparently, I knew that just blanked on his name.
I knew that it happened, but I didn't know that he was a serial killer. Andrew had, according to some of his own friends, met Gianni at a party. It's never really been confirmed if the two of them had a relationship either, much like Lee Miglin. Gianni's partner Antonio, who he had been with for years and lived with, insisted that neither he nor Gianni knew Andrew Cunanan, but nobody can really be clear on that. Gianni was everything that Andrew wanted to be, though, and that's something that we do know from his personality. One of the things that I had seen in a documentary that I was watching was that apparently Andrew had met Gianni. Gianni was doing some costume work for a ballet. Andrew had gone to the VIP after party, and that was where the two of them met, was out in California when he was doing that.
Okay.
He had finagled his way in there, and that's where
Which,
the two
no
of them
surprise
met.
that he was able to get himself in there, but also, like, how many people do people meet at after parties? You're not special.
Andrew Cunanan ran down the street. After shooting him, he went into a nearby parking garage. Witnesses had told the police that they saw him run inside, and when the police entered the garage, they found William Reese's red pickup truck and Andrew Cunanan's clothing and wallet inside of it with his identification spilled out. But Andrew Cunanan was not there with his belongings. He had escaped again.
He just, like, got naked and left all of his stuff.
I mean, he had clothing on. He just was living out of the car. Here's another really interesting element to this. One of the things that Andrew Cunanan did after he murdered Lee Miglin back in Chicago was he stole his prized coin collection with the intent that he would be able to sell it or pawn it. He steals this coin collection. While he's in South Beach, he takes them to a pawn shop. So he did this before he killed Gianni Versace.
Okay.
He had been in South Beach for a while. He was actually there for, I want to say, about a month.
Oh.
He had to give a fingerprint. He had to show his ID. The address that he listed was for a motel.
That he clearly was not at.
No, he was.
Oh.
He gave the address of a motel he was staying at.
I mean, Mensa level genius, you idiot.
His name is on it. He's all over the news. He's been all over the news.
What a dingleberry.
One of the FBI's top 10 most wanted. And the person that checked the records at the pawn shop was out of town and had not been looking at them, but would have definitely noticed his name.
Yeah, no kidding.
So he was able to just skate by. Like I said, he's one of the luckiest killers like I've ever seen. They find the address for the motel. So police go in there. Media obviously are all over it. Police cordon it off and they tell the media, you guys can come in and you can look through the rooms and get your pictures and do whatever you want to do after we're done with it, which they do, which makes sense.
Yeah.
They check the hotel room that he listed on that pawn shop slip and they go in there and they look through everything and then they're like, okay, media, come on in. But the media go in and they get the bright idea that they should see if they can look through some of the other vacant rooms. Andrew Cunanan had been switching rooms the whole time he was there, and the room that the media checked after the initial one that the police had searched had all of his stuff in it.
Oh my gosh.
There were even his beard trimmings all over the sink. The media have it on camera. They're touching everything. They're contaminating all of the evidence. They're going through everything.
Like, look at what we found.
They believed that it was okay for them to go through things. So
because they were proof for one spot only.
it's crazy how the media had the idea to check the other vacant rooms and the police did not. They had the whole building to themselves. They could have checked that room.
Yeah.
All that evidence is now contaminated. What happens a couple of days later is that a caretaker of a houseboat located across from the Fontainebleau Hotel in Miami heard a gunshot sound coming from within the houseboat, and there was a TV blaring. He could tell that it was the news. He immediately told his son to phone 911 and get authorities out there, because when you hear a gunshot and somebody's not supposed to be staying in a houseboat, you panic. Police were called on scene. They have a feeling that this could potentially be the guy that they're looking for.
Because, you know, he keeps shooting people.
The entire street is cordoned. Media descend on the scene immediately in hordes, and after about 4 hours of securing the property and throwing in a whole lot of tear gas, authorities entered the houseboat and found Andrew Cunanan. He had shot himself in the head.
Now that I know that he is the idiot who killed an icon, I remember watching the news and then the whole Gianni Versace thing happening and then the houseboat happening, because I was like, when are you going to get to the houseboat?
After he died, Cunanan's parents had to keep his burial site a secret for fear that it was going to be vandalized.
I mean, they're not wrong.
After his death, the unanswered questions about his exact motives kept the public talking about it, and we just don't know the answers. And his death was in a lot of ways how I'm sure he wanted it to end. A giant enigma. With that being said, I have a closing statement.
Oh.
Après moi, le déluge. After me, the flood.
That was super good. I couldn't figure out why I maybe knew that name because there's so many people that I'm like, oh yeah. And then of course you got to Versace and then eventually to the houseboat and I was like, well, I was watching that on TV.